joining us in this conversation that we're going to have today about the issues that we are facing in Chelsea. Thank you so much for showing up. I am so appreciative to have this crowd here. I am so happy to see everybody here. I am the Executive Director of CAPIC. For those who do not know me, I am thrilled to see you all here this morning. And I will tell you that in the 57 years of CAPIC's history, MASSCAP has not been to Chelsea once. So we are excited, we are more than excited to welcome MASSCAP, our supporting agency, to Chelsea today. And we're going to have a really good conversation about the issues that we're dealing with here in Chelsea. And I think we've got the right people in the room to talk about the issues that we're dealing with. And Joe Diamond is the Executive Director of MASSCAP. I am thrilled to have received Joe's support. I came into this position 3 years ago. I'm a pandemic baby. And I have had nothing but support from Joe and MASSCAP and Lisa Clay and all the folks over at MASSCAP. So I am thrilled that they are here to join us here this morning. And they are our supporting agency. We have 23 CAA community action agencies across the state. CAPIC is just one of 23. And MASSCAP supports us. MASSCAP advocates for us for funding. MASSCAP advocates for us for other things, all resources, all things that are necessary. They have been our supporters and our advocators in raising funds and making sure that on the state level, all the issues that we are facing with our agencies are addressed. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful partnership that we have. They are extremely supportive. They're on the forefront of issues that we deal with in our Head Start. They're always advocating for our agencies, and I am thrilled to have other people from other agencies, sister agencies here at Chelsea today to support us as well. I'm excited about this program, and I'm going to introduce Mr. Joe Diamond from MASSCAP.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm thrilled to be in this room. This is the council chamber, and this is the room where it happens in Chelsea. And it's great that we're able to be here together in this room because this is where the voices are raised, and we're going to raise some more voices today. It's been really wonderful getting to know Rochelle. It's true, she started at Chelsea as the executive director of CAPIC, right, I think it was at the very beginning of the pandemic. That was her introduction.
I was woke during the pandemic.
It was also baptism by fire, but we are so lucky because it's almost like it was a plan. She was the person for the job at the time. She's a newer executive director among many executive directors that we across the state. And has become so rapidly a leader, not only because of her skill, but because of her wisdom and her commitment, which was recognized recently, and as you probably all know, she was given just the other day, last night, the Humanitarian Award from the People's African Methodist. As Rochelle said, MASSCAP is the association of the 23 federally mandated anti-poverty agencies in Massachusetts. There are 1,000 actually across the country, created in 1964 as part of the Great Society programs. We're really proud of that history. It's a history that we embrace, and we think that the work that's been done, and the structure of those agencies is basically the same. It's an important legacy. We learn from the past, but we are always looking to the future. And so part of what we do, part of our responsibility in terms of the agencies themselves is to make sure that we serve with a variety of integrated services. Also, our responsibility is to make sure that we raise the issue, have the discussion about how to address poverty together as frequently as we can, and as effectively as we can, and as locally as we can. In a few minutes, we're going to be hearing from Nancy Wagner from Mass Budget to talk about the report on poverty that the Mass Budget prepared for us. It's updated every year since 2013. It provides important context for our work. It's a jumping off point for us to be able to have these conversations and be able to move forward in terms of public policies, programs, and practices. So we're thrilled that you're all here today. We're also looking forward to the panel today, where we'll have some really good discussions led by Alex Train, who's here as well from Chelsea. So without any further ado, if it's okay with Nancy, I'd like to ask Nancy Wagner to join in. Oh, that's right. Lisa, have we sort of initiated the mentor activity?
Yes. You should have a little yellow sheet that tells you how to fill out the questions. And the first question was just so everybody see who's in the room with us today. Just go to nt.com and put in that code, and then you just question will be there. We have a couple more questions that I'll put there.
This will give us a sense of who's here. Certainly there's a lot of diversity. And by the end, we will have some ideas related to next steps, action steps that we can all do together, things that we can support, that things that we're talking about. Why don't we move now to hear from Nancy Wagner from Mass Budget Policy Center. The Mass Budget Policy Center has been a partner of ours for so many years, and is really the place that people like us go to for economic information and policy information. So, Nancy, please join us.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to try to do this without a mic. I think I can speak loudly enough, but please, please, please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm just not very good with one, so I'd rather shout. So Lisa's going to pull up. I'm going to tell a story, and it's a picture book, so I have slides because I like pictures. And it was such a great introduction by Joe, because I really believe that the best way for all of us to have this conversation about how Chelsea can move forward is to think about where we've come from, because we don't just magically arrive in the moment. There's been a series of decisions, policy decisions over the years that lead us to where we are today. And it's just really helpful to get that context, that framing in our minds as we're thinking about where we want to be tomorrow. As Joe said, I'm from Mass Budget and Policy Center. We're a public policy think tank focused on racial equity, racial and economic equity, based in Boston. I'm the Research and Kids Camp Director. This report here you can find called At a Crossroads, created by COVID. And we've already brought up COVID. I think COVID has really had a really significant impact on many of the ways we go about our lives. And I think many of us see how we have come to a crossroads. It's put us at a crossroads where we have a lot of choices to make. You know, you get to a crossroads and you say, which way am I going to go? So I think that's the framing in which I want to have this conversation. You can get a copy of this report at masscap.org. That's the Community Action Agency, and also at massbudget.org. That's so I'm probably not going to be able to use the clippers, so I'm going to have to ask you, Lisa, to advance slides for me.
The down arrow, you said it's the down arrow.
Yeah. No, it didn't. No, but it was because you did it. Oh, yes. So, when this report that we've done is, we talk about a road to opportunity. Well, what is opportunity? I mean, we live in a beautiful state. I mean, look at these are beautiful pictures. And I think we all know what opportunity is. It's this sort of vision that we have, what we want to promise to our kids about everyone should have their best chance at their brightest future. Our schools, our public schools should be well-resourced, well-funded, providing great education that sets each kid on whatever path they choose. We want to live in communities that are safe, that are affordable, that are well-resourced, that have parks and playgrounds and libraries, that provide great opportunities. We want to have jobs that are stable, pay well, with good benefits. These are the things we want for ourselves, for our family, we want for our neighbors. This is the kind of opportunity we have. So that's the road to opportunity. we're talking about. So, I'm telling you a story. I'm doing it because I'm from Mass Budget. I'm doing it with graphs. But don't worry, I will explain the graphs so that you know what I'm talking about. And as I said, I want to go back a little bit, and I'm going to go back just a couple generations to what we call the post-World War II economic boom. You might have heard about the post-war boom. I'm just going to tell that story. So this is a picture of post-World War II America. It's a graph. Across the bottom, you see some dates, 1948 to 1972. That's about the post-World War II period, okay? What we're going to measure is something that's growing. We're just going to measure whether something is growing. If something has grown by 100%, it's doubled, right? Does that sound familiar from math? Okay, so this is our picture of post-World War II America. Here's this first something we're going to measure, and it's productivity. If any of you are economists, it's net productivity, but regardless, this is productivity, and you know what it is? It's the economy. It's just a fancy word for the economy. This is the U.S. economy, and we're measuring how it's grown during this post-World War II period. And when I look at that, I say, it's grown. It's about double during this period. You can see it's just a line, like little wiggles. There are always wiggles, but it's grown. It's about double during this period. That's very interesting. After World War II, the economy grew. Okay, so I'm putting another line up. This one's called compensation. It's sort of compensation. It's like wages and benefits, but what it really is, it's what's going into workers' pockets. Okay? So this is very interesting to me. I hope you look, those two lines are almost exactly on top of each other. You can barely see where one line starts and the other one stops. What this is telling us is during this period, for many working people, the economy grew, and what went into people's pockets grew at about that same rate. That's what this story is telling us right here. And this is sort of a story of the post-World War II economic boom. And what we can see here is this is national income data. Don't have to go into all the details, but what you can see here is these lines are kind of growing that same way. This is saying for people sort of near the bottom, their incomes grew. People whose incomes were in the middle, their incomes grew. People at the top, their incomes grew. And you know what? They all grew at about the same rate. You can see that these lines, again, are kind of on top of each other. Okay, this is interesting. Here's another picture. These are more pictures of this period. I love that ad from the Ford Motor Foundation, Ford Motor Company in the early 1950s. You used to have one car, now you can buy two cars. You know, it's this sort of idea of prosperity, of consumer goods, you know, suburbanization. We have interstates. This is, this might be 93, I think. And the interstates that are sort of prominent, that are turning our small, you know, sort of our small towns in Massachusetts into suburbs, you know, prosperous suburbs. This is all this story of the post-World War II prosperity. This is very interesting, an important story. But there's also another side to this story. So while we have this sort of economic boom, there were a variety of federal, state, and local policy choices that were made that put up barriers that blocked access to that opportunity that was created by the economy. It was blocking some people from getting access to that prosperity. So this map in the back might be a familiar sort of map. It's actually, there's Chelsea in there. This is a map that was created by a federal agency, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, in the late 1930s, 40s. They sent people out into neighborhoods across the country to describe, define, and map out the communities based on who lived there. And then these neighborhoods were color-coded. So this was a way for the Homeowners Loan Corporation to decide which neighborhoods were those that were great for providing lending opportunities, for business loans, for home loans. Neighborhoods that were outlined in blue were like, let's go get them neighborhoods. Let's pour lots of money into the blue neighborhoods. And there were some neighborhoods outlined in green. They had some quote-unquote risk factors, but still ready for lending. Then there were neighborhoods that were yellow. And some neighborhoods were outlined in red. You may have heard the term redlining. That's where it comes from. The neighborhoods that were outlined in red by the Homeowners Loan Corporation were considered hazardous for lending. And what were the characteristics of those neighborhoods? It had nothing to do with the creditworthiness of the families who lived there. It was the demographics of lived there. It was people of color, it was low-wage workers, it was immigrants. In those neighborhoods, simply by virtue of who lived there, those neighborhoods were denied access to loans, to mortgages, and in a sense, this was a barrier, saying people who live in these neighborhoods aren't going to have access to this booming prosperity that was available to others. And that was a policy choice. That was a policy choice made at that time by the federal government. So there was unequal access to mortgage and credits. Many may have heard the stories of the GI Bill was really important for opportunity for many vets returning to their communities. The GI Bill was not equally accessible for black vets, though black vets returning from fighting in the war were not able to get the same kind of benefits as the white vets were. We had segregated public housing, restrictive zoning. I have a little orange arrow there pointing to an excerpt from a community, a deed for a community in Western Mass here. It says, no persons of any race other than the white race shall use or occupy any buildings or lot. So these are called restrictive covenants. You might have heard that term. This is here in Massachusetts. Don't be surprised. Again, so if you lived in a red line neighborhood and you wanted to move out to a suburb where you could get a loan, you might have been denied access to living in those communities. Those same interstates that turned our small towns into booming, prosperous suburbs also cut through neighborhoods. They chopped. This is a picture of 93 again, chopping through Somerville. These interstates were carved right through neighborhoods, which also sort of disrupted community, residential, and economic patterns. So again, these were all policy choices made during this same period that went alongside the policy choices that allowed for prosperity and economic opportunity for many. So Joe mentioned the, I'm zooming ahead. The civil rights movement, all sorts of activism in the 50s and 60s, led to the war on poverty. President Johnson right here, he's declaring his war on poverty where he wants to use the weapons of better schools, health, homes, trainings, and jobs. I highlight the 1964 Economic Opportunity Act because that creates the network of community action agencies. And this is the map of them across the state, still providing essential services, created all that time ago and still doing their job to help bring prosperity to low-income communities. So, another graph. So some people say, well, war on poverty. Did he win it? Did we lose it? Why has poverty persisted if there was a war on poverty? It's an actually very interesting and important question. And this graph here, we have U.S. poverty rates and Massachusetts poverty rates. And what I want you to see from this graph is a drop in the beginning in poverty, and then things kind of flatten out. Okay, so the important thing is that drop, which tells us something. It tells us that the programs that were created by the war on poverty that many of you are involved in, they actually have worked. Those programs, SNAP, housing assistance, other kinds of benefits, we know from the data, love data, we know from the data that they have in fact served to cut poverty in half. Those programs alone have lifted people out of poverty. This is kind of a weird sort of graph. You're going to see one like this at the end, so I want to explain how to read it. So imagine that the whole blue donut is all the people in Massachusetts. That orange wedge is people who these programs have benefited, have made them less poor, but they're still in poverty. okay? Then that pale blue wedge is the people who would have been in poverty had they not had access to SNAP, housing assistance, EITC, child tax credits, school meals, the other kinds of programs that were created during the War on Poverty. And you can see by the size and shapes of those wedges that poverty would be double if we didn't have access to those programs. Similarly for kids. You know, we know that these data are slightly old, but we know that about 170,000 kids in 2017 have in poverty thanks to these programs. We know they're doing their job. Okay, so war on poverty. Why do we still have poverty? It's not the programs. Something else must be going on. So let's keep looking. So, do you remember these lines? This was the economy and wages right on top of each other during the post-World War II period. Now what we want to do is take this story out to our current generation and just see what's going on. Okay, there's the economy. It's wiggles, always wiggles, ups and downs, we know that, but it's still growing. You can see that in general, it's sort of that line is just continuing to grow. So, it's not the economy's fault. We have a really robust economy overall in this country. But look at what's happened to wages. This is what goes into workers' pockets. This is very interesting because we have found that policy changes, it's not magical, policy changes broke that link between economic growth and growth in wages and benefits. Something happened. It wasn't magic. It's policy choices broke that link that meant that all of a sudden we stopped getting this benefit from the growing economy. So what are some of those policy changes? This is sort of a collage I put together of examples of the kinds of policy changes. Right there in the middle you see Reagan reversing many U.S. policies. The text is over there on the left. And during the 70s, at the time of that break, there were federal choices to do a number of things. First of all, the federal agencies that were designed to support workers were starved of resources. They weren't funded. There was a focus on sort of concern about inflation rather than concern at the macroeconomic, rather than concerned about unemployment. The protections for unions were limited. The minimum wage, minimum wage has been around for a long time, but it didn't grow to keep up with inflation. And again, there was deregulation of corporations that allowed them to continue to make profits without the kind of oversight that they used to have. So these were a series, again, of policy choices that broke that link. So remember we had U.S. data where we showed wages at different income levels going up in the same rate? Now look at what happens with wages. These now are Massachusetts data, because I have Massachusetts data for this. What do we see for folks at the bottom? What's happening to their wages? This is adjusted for inflation? Flat. What's happening for folks in the middle? Incomes in the middle? Flat. This is kind of confusing, because the economy is still doing really well. Where is all the benefit of economic growth during this time? It's not going into most people's pockets. You can see that. Where's it going? One more line. This is folks in Massachusetts at the tippy top. This is the top 1%. These are folks with incomes, let's say about now in today's dollars, about $700,000, $800,000 a year. Folks at the tippy top have been doing really well. So what we see is, I call this is our picture of growing inequality in Massachusetts. So the economy is doing fine. Who's benefiting from it is what's changed. So this chart with another line is, I think, out in the front. I just want to sort of dig in a little deeper to numbers in the middle. We know that when you disaggregate by data, which is hard in Massachusetts just because we're a very white state, we also know that for Black and Latinx workers, it's even tougher. They're more likely to be stuck in lower wage jobs, and we see with the wages with those jobs what happens? Flat. So So we'll zoom now into today, and then we'll turn over to our piano. But I just want to show you, so keep all of that history in mind when you look at what do these numbers show us today. It's not, we know about we know about this history of unequal access to economic opportunity, and it shows up in the numbers today. It shows right up. You can see that the Chelsea median household income is about $60,000-$70,000, and this is 2021 estimates, compared to the statewide median income of close to $90,000. For whites, it's high. You know, I'm not going to read all these numbers, it would be boring, but the point is that you can see how this unequal access to economic opportunity shows up today in our numbers. This is showing, the official poverty rate is very low, and the cost of living is very high in Massachusetts. So I always like to look at population about twice the poverty rate. We call it sort of poor, near poor. And what we can see that almost in some of our communities, Lawrence, Springfield, Holyoke, almost half of our folks are poor or near poor. This is current data. You may have heard a lot about wealth inequality. Well, where does wealth come from? Wealth is something that gets passed down typically from generation to generation. If your mother or grandmother did not have access to a loan to start a business, to buy a house, it is much more likely that you, in this generation, are not going to have accumulated wealth. So year after year of this income and opportunity inequality shows up in wealth inequality. The two sets of numbers here, you may be familiar with the numbers from 2015 from the Boston Federal Reserve Bank that showed that in eastern Massachusetts, white household net worth was about $247,000, black net worth about $8, not a typo. I also have more recent U.S. numbers here. I'm excited because the Fed is going to be updating their reports, so we'll get more up-to-date numbers on that. But wealth inequality is something that is important to keep in mind as well. So we've talked about COVID being a crossroads, and I think many people talk about how COVID showed a spotlight on our state, shining on inequities in a variety of ways. I'm here talking in Chelsea. I don't need to be telling you this. You were really the heart and the epicenter of COVID, so I feel really silly sort of telling the story here. But you all know that social distancing and remote work are luxuries that not everybody could. So what this table does is it puts together how these long-standing inequities and access to good jobs and housing played a role in COVID spread. And you can see Chelsea, 80% people of color, 30% residents poor, near poor, median income we've talked about below the state average. About 1 out of every 4 Chelsea renters is paying 50% or more of their income on rent. The unemployment rate, during the peak was about 1 in 5, and the COVID case rate was much higher. All of these, again, I don't need to tell you, you were living it. So the feds have been a partner. Policy choices continue to be important, and the feds have been a partner to the state. About $115 billion in federal relief has come to the state. This is just listing all of those. I'm not going to go into it now. Here's a donut graph again, because I don't know what this is. Here's what I want to point out about our federal partnership. We know that this is U.S. data, that the federal COVID relief policies that increased the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit have had a dramatic impact on kids. And in fact, those two policies have cut kid poverty in half. So when you hear at the state about campaigns to increase the EITC, to expand the child tax credit at the state, that's a way to continue that policy impact beyond when the federal COVID relief runs out. Because this is when the federal COVID relief had expanded the EITC and the child tax credit, and that has gone back to where it was. But this is the point I want to make, is these programs have lifted kids out of poverty. Those who haven't been lifted all the way out of poverty are certainly made less poor. So, final few words about 2020 and the census. As you all know, the pandemic dramatically affected data collection on the census, both the decennial census and the American Community Survey. There was a very important, valuable grassroots effort here in Chelsea that helped increase participation in Chelsea. Thank you to all of you who did that. I will always say the 2020 census, we know already probably missed 1 out of 20 of our youngest kids. Kids under 5 are probably not showing up in the census. We need to keep that in mind when we look at those numbers. At stake is accuracy, equity, power, money. And you say, why are we talking about the census? And I say, well, this entire conversation has been about the census. Each of these charts, stories that I've told you about have relied on data from the census. So you tell the stories of your communities, and we add to those stories with these data. And I'm saying this as sort of because I want to pitch the census as always being important. It's 2023, in about 2 or 3 years, we're going to start organizing for the count in 2030. So don't forget about the census. It's always important every year. And in fact, every year it's bringing money into our communities. Federal funding, you know, that $115 billion in federal COVID relief, some portion of it, not all of it, some portion of it is distributed to Chelsea based on your census counts. So if you don't get counted in the census, your community misses out on money it would be entitled to. So this is just a listing of some of the many programs that are that we rely on federal funding. We rely on our census counts, the population estimates that come from our census counts. Congress passes money and they distribute it based on population or other sort of data that come from these services. They're really, really important. So, finally, I sort of came up with 4 takeaways. You might have your own. Policies have had long-lasting impacts and have cemented racial and economic inequality. Poverty comes from low-wage work, under-resourced communities. The crisis created by COVID has created an opportunity to move forward with bold solutions that center equity. And the data we have shapes the stories we tell, and the census holds a key to power and money. So that's where you can get in touch with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. That information is very, very powerful. It gives us a picture of a snapshot of how Chelsea, how our community has been, how we came to this point in poverty. The history of how we got here, institutionalized redlining, decisions that were made to exclude lower income, to exclude Black and brown people. You know what I mean? So this information is very, very powerful because it gives us a sense of where do we go, who do we address, how do we address this issue, and who do we have as our audience? How do we make these changes moving forward? We know where it comes from. We don't want to be in this position anymore, and we want to make some changes. So thank you, Nancy, so much for sharing that information with us. And I'm going to bring up our keynote speaker. I'm thrilled, I was so thrilled to have Judith Garcia join us as our keynote speaker. Judith Garcia is a Chelsea girl. She is an advocate of all the things important to us in all our agencies in Chelsea. She's one of our sisters in the mission, and I'm truly thrilled to have her. She was just recently elected as a state representative, great Chelsea behind her, and we are thrilled to have Judith at this level because we know that she's going to do greater things at the state levels of Chelsea. Thank you so much, Judy.
Thank you so much for having me. I definitely want to recognize everyone here and say that, you know, for me, this presentation is definitely a reflection of what we inherited. And what we inherited is an inequitable system that has kept our community impoverished, and it continues to keep us there. But today, we are here at such a symbolic place. We're at the Chelsea Chambers, and for the past 8 years, I've had the honor to sit right there at that corner, making some really tough choices, but constantly I don't do that alone. I do that recognizing the leadership and work of many of the people who are here. You know, when I look at this audience, I see members of community health centers. I see leadership of nonprofit organizations. I see community members who have been doing the community building. I see individuals who have always stood up to really fight against the injustices that this community has seen. And, you know, when I was invited to speak in this panel, and I knew that the conversation and the theme is finding a way forward, I can't help but think about what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
You know, we were faced with a tremendous challenge that did not only affect Chelsea, but it affected every single community in the state. It affected our nation, the world. But it was communities like Chelsea who have inherited an inequitable system that would hit the hardest. And when I was invited to speak here, I figured, you know, obviously I'm invited here because I'm making history, right? I'm making history as the first woman, the first Latina, the first daughter of Chelsea, but also the daughter of an essential worker who has the lived experience of many of these families and many of these individuals. And yeah, I'm making history, and I'm expected to go to the state level and make policy changes. And you know, we often talk about representation and how much it matters. But what we really need to focus on is that with representation comes great responsibility. And when I talk about that, I mean, it's not just enough to speak in platitudes. It's not just enough to say, hey, look, I'm Latina and we're making history and I'm going to the State House. It's what can we be doing at the policy level to really affect change. And I have been fortunate, even though this community for 32 years lacked the representation at the state level, I have been fortunate to be raised by a community where I've learned from the examples of leaders who have fought against every injustice. Many of the leaders here have taught me the importance of grassroots, the importance of really going out there and using the power that we have, our voices. You know, I see my colleague, my sister in service here, Marinda Vega Maldonado, Councilor Marinda Vega Maldonado, who made history as the youngest elected official in the history of Chelsea, and with that came a lot of responsibility. And we understand the responsibility because every time we sit here and we're making policy decisions, we're working in partnership with a lot of the nonprofits. We're working in partnership and recognizing that a lot of the municipal employees have chosen to live in this community and they want to keep moving our city forward in a positive direction. So that's the sort of leader I want to be at the state level, someone who always recognizes that we need to work in partnership, that in unity, that's our superpower. You know, part of my story, for those who don't know me, I am the proud daughter of a single mother who emigrated from Honduras back in the late 80s. And you saw from the graphic, right? Chelsea has a lot of histories of waves of immigration. And my mom was forced out of her country. She didn't want to be here. She didn't come here by choice. She came here out of necessity, looking for an affordable home, looking for a better job, looking for a lot of the things that Nancy pointed out today, right? We're not, our families and individuals are not looking for miracles. They're looking to live in a dignified way. And this is a story of the Polish immigrants that were here before my mother. This is a story of the Jewish communities that made Chelsea their home before my mother. And her story is she rented a room on 4th Street, and she tells me that she used to sleep on the floor, and she was so shy to cook, right? Because she used to do room boarding, right? That's the reality of our communities. She was living with people she didn't know, renting a little room, sleeping in the floor, and she would never cook because she was too shy. And she tells me, I would buy food, and the son of my roommate would always eat my food, and sometimes I would go to bed without food in my stomach. And then she got a job at CAM. How many of you know CAM? CAM Foods. My mom is working there until this day.
That's pretty good.
And I share this story with you because when we talk about policy, when we talk about how policy is a choice, we as elected officials have the responsibility to make sure that our families and our single moms out there don't go to bed hungry, like my mom did. And I don't know why I cried, I said I was going to cry. But I cry because I know that by making history, I carry this huge responsibility to make sure that those cycles of poverty are broken. And my mom landed her first job, and it was CAM, and she tells me she used to get paid $5 an hour. And she was taught the value of work ethic by the Polish immigrants who were here before us. And she didn't speak English, and she certainly didn't speak Polish. And it was hard for her. It was really, really hard, but she told me, we all shared, even though we did not speak the same language, we all shared at the very core the same values and the same dreams. To have a better home, to get a good paid job, to retire in dignity, to give the best that we can for our kids, to offer our kids the best education. And then I came along, another challenge for her, like many challenges for many of our single moms. It's how to raise a kid, earning $5 an hour, having to pay rent. My mom was a victim of domestic violence, and she had to make a tough choice. Do I choose to stay with this man who helps me get by and pay rent? Or do I choose to break out of that cycle of violence and make a path on my own and figure it out? And she did that, She tells me, we live on Walnut Street, and she tells me that there were times where she couldn't afford rent. So she did what she knew best, and it was, she started calling family in Honduras and saying, hey, do you want to come to America and seek the American dream? And little by little, she brought her brother and her sister and her other sister, and she opened the door, the pathway to opportunity by helping them. You guys know these stories, right? You bring your family and your other family, and you help them land a job, and you take them to that temp agency, and little by little they started paying rent. And then one day, the landlord said to my mother, I'm selling this house, a 3-decker. And my mom figured, oh my God, if he sells it, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Rent is unaffordable at the time, talking about the 90s. Rent was not affordable back then. Let's talk about rent now.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Let's talk about inflation now.
Yeah.
And what was your graphic? Your graphic was about how we continue to see that wages are staying the same for the 99%. And, my mom makes 2023. She'd kill me if she thought I'm sharing this with you. But she makes $18 an hour. And she's been working at CAM for, I'm 31. She had me a few years before, so you do the math. So that's the reality. And the part with the story of the home is she tells me, I don't know what took over me. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit. But I told the landlord, I'll buy this house. I'll buy it. And she tells me that he said to her, sure. And she said, yeah, I'll buy it. And she tells me, I closed that door behind me and I said, oh, holy Jesus, how am I going to pay for this house? And she saved $3,000. $3,000 $3,000. I mean, we talked about the loans, right? We talked about the loans and how difficult it was. Well, it was difficult for her. You know, she put $3,000 there, and then she had to take some PMI insurance and all these things. And I remember being with her. I was young. I was like 7, 8 years old, and there were a lot of things my mom didn't understand. You know, and I had to be there, and I had to be the interpreter at that very young age. And that's the story to this day of many of Chelsea residents. You go to the community health center in Chelsea, and you see that little kid, that Chelsea kid translating for their parents. And that was my life. You know, that was my life. And I remember she did buy the house. And that to her was an example of achievement. Even though she didn't know how to, you know, the responsibility that came with that, that to her was really the, I made it, right? And then it's the, oh God, how am I going to pay for this? How am I going to pay for that? And then you have the typical struggle. And those are the stories that our families are facing. And there's other people who can't afford rental this thing. There are other people now with the challenges that we're facing and the inflation that we're facing and everything you pointed out that have to get 3 jobs. My mom has only had, she's been privileged to only have to have 1 job. Families today need 3 jobs to make ends meet. Rent is $2,000, $3,000. And, you know, what's our pathway forward, right? What's the way forward? And what this community has done, even though we've recognized, we've inherited an inequitable system, what we've learned is government is slow to act. We're hesitant to experiment. But Chelsea, this community, the municipal leaders, Tom Rosino, our city manager, his administration, the local employees, the grassroots activists, the community organizations, we have stepped up together to the plate to challenge those notions and introduced bold legislation. The Chelsea Eats, I always say Uber, it's Chelsea Eats. The Chelsea Eats program was innovative, and we were the first in the state to do it. The Chelsea Eats program, we got criticized because we were giving money out to what others say the poor. That's not what we were doing. What we were doing is we were giving a lifeline to families who needed it most. When the pandemic hit and families couldn't afford rent, we said, let's make sure that, yeah, the state was doing incredible work. You know, we've been lucky to have Senator Salva Domenico and State Representative Danny Ryan fighting for us and being our champions. But let's be real, you know, they can only do so much. At the municipal level, we have to step up and act to the plate, and we did that. Right? We looked at the challenges. We thought about those people that have different immigration statuses that were left behind by some of these programs. We saw rental assistance programs where you were undocumented, you couldn't apply. How can we say that when more than 70% of our population is not only poor, right? The median income is, from what we saw, I think you said it was 50 to 70,000. That's the median income in a community where there was a report that came out just over the summer that in order to live in Boston, you need to make at least $160,000 to just get by. So we created bold initiatives to address some of those gaps, and we can continue to do that, but we need to be bold in our action. And as it was said today, policy, those are our choices, and we need to work in community to make sure that we're making the right decisions, we're doing right for our people, and we need to continue to do that. So today, I don't want to take too much of our time because we have a panel, and you'll hear today that our way forward is doing exactly that, working together. You'll have the opportunity to hear from our senator what's going on in our state, where you're going to hear from Jennifer what we're doing and what we can be doing for our local businesses that in majority are minority, right? And they need the help because they're the engines of our economy. What can we be doing? You know, you're going to hear from Don Cortez. A lot of the programs that we're doing, the Chelsea Hub program, a lot of the downtown initiatives that are happening have been successful because we've seen the intersectionality of working together. Rochelle, we're going to hear from you, from CAPIC. CAPIC has allowed a lot of people to have fuel assistance, to apply for SNAP programming, to break a little bit and mitigate those cycles of poverty. And obviously, we're going to hear from Jennifer, who's going to talk a little bit about, not mistaken, about more of the health disparities that's going on in our community, how we can address that through community health centers. And we're going to be moderated by one of our brightest and best municipal employees, who's a Chelsea resident, and who not only focuses a lot. I feel like Alex is the sort of person who handles every project in Chelsea. Like any new project, he's just at the forefront. I have no idea if you sleep. I bet you probably don't.
I wanted to say.
Yeah, I wanted to say, but I challenge you to really learn and take notes from the panel today, because they are the ones at the forefront. Not only at the forefront, I also should say many of them hide behind the curtain. A lot of the folks that you don't see, who are writing the policies, who are thinking of how we're going to implement programs. I can tell you that there's elected officials here that we dream sometimes, but the ones who make sure that the policy is happening and it's viable are the municipal employees. So with that, I leave you, and I hope that you really cherish the voices and what you're going to hear today, and that we all learn something from our incredible leaders and people that make Chelsea thrive. So, thank you so much.
What an incredible story. Thank you so much, Judith, for sharing with us. And along with sharing with us, you share our passion for the mission. You share our passion for community, and I am so thankful that you're going to be on that level and advocating for us on that level, because we are going to do so much more for Chelsea. You only just begun, girl. You have only just begun. We are truly thankful to have you. So next I'm going to introduce our moderator. As Judith started talking about Alex has been a huge advocate for all of our agencies, for all of Chelsea, for all the issues that we deal with. Every single day, there isn't one day that Alex doesn't get a phone call, an email, or a request to solve some issue that we're dealing with. And he is right there all the time. And like she said, I don't know when he sleeps. But thank you so much, Alex Train.
Good morning, everyone. Rochelle, thank you for the introduction, and Representative Garcia, thank you for the moving, inspiring keynote speech. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, if you wouldn't mind coming up. We'll dive into a couple of questions. Looking forward to this morning's discussion. At the end, we're going to leave about 20 minutes for a Q&A session, so if you have questions that you're looking to ask any of the panelists, or just more generally, we'll move into that in about 15-20 minutes after we hear from the panelists. Fantastic. So first up, I just want to express my gratitude to all of our panelists. Devoting their careers to Chelsea, all have been unstinting supporters of lifting Chelsea residents out of poverty and tackling these issues of racial inequity in our community. And so to start, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Domenico to introduce himself, and then we'll move on with the remaining introductions.
Hello everyone, great to be here in Chelsea with all of my friends. There's so many people here who, as Representative Garcia-elect Garcia said, who have made a huge impact on the community. I want to thank her as well. You can see how impressive she is by her presentation today. You can see why we have such great hope, and we know we have someone who's been fighting by our side for Chelsea and state. So thank you for that. That was amazing. I've heard her speak many times, but that was a personal story, and connecting all of that and understanding how it has just a family with everyone else. But I'm Sal Domenico, State Senator for Chelsea. I also represent the cities of Everett and community of Charlestown and half the city of Cambridge. I grew up in the city of Cambridge. I live in Everett, and the best part is my mom grew up in Chelsea. So my family started here in this community. My mom went to the Shipper School, which was and also the Living Center. And my parents got married at St. Rose Church as well, so it all started here with my family in Chelsea. That's why I represent Chelsea with the passion of her, right? I understand the needs and I understand we need more than our fair share. More than our fair share of obstacles and challenges in this community. And that's why my colleagues hate me to say that, but that's a fact. It's a fact. We need more than our fair share. So it's great to be here with all of you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Jen?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Hassel. I'm the Executive Director at the Chelsea Chamber of Commerce. First, I'd like to thank you, Michelle, for asking me to join this panel, and I'm honored to be here amongst this panel. I am a lifelong resident of Chelsea, born and raised, and I am honestly honored, for lack of a better word, to be at the Chelsea Chamber of Commerce to represent the community and the small businesses. I'm here to give everyone a voice, not only the business owners, but the community members alike. As Judith mentioned, we have to collaborate with all the organizations. And I know that when you hear Chamber of Commerce, you think old business, and that's not the case here in Chelsea. Being a Chelsea girl myself, I'm super passionate. I still live here. I've raised my family here. I met my husband here. And as most of us usually say when we're from Chelsea, we are Chelsea. And what we want to see is Chelsea thrive, as it should. We're all passionate about the community, and I think that this is a great panel that represents where we want to see our community go in the future. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I just want to start off by saying in the future when you hear the nickname GG, you can see you heard it here first, because that stands for Governor Garcia. I met Judith when she was pretty young. I thought she was still in high school. She was helping with a REACH program at the high school. I was working with some kids there, and she kind of joined us, and we had long conversations. Now, I would always walk away thinking, this person is somewhere. She did it before she was city councilman, so she is a real value. I also just want to start out by saying that I'm an immigrant kid too, and your story really touched me. So I think what's really important for us, I'm sorry, my name is Dan Cortez, I'm a community engagement specialist for the Chelsea Police Department. Just real quickly about the Judith story, it's very touching. My parents we came to the United States when I was 5 years old. I grew up in Arizona. And my grandfather was a Bracetto, was part of the Bracetto program that Google it was a government, guest worker program that I don't know why we don't have that now, but it first started with my older aunts and uncles. In Arizona we say aunts, but anyway, now I say aunts. My aunts and uncles. One by one, we started coming in California and Arizona, and my dad's family migrated mostly to Illinois because there was work there, right? There was a farm worker. My mom picked grapes, and lettuce and things like that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that it really touched on why I feel very blessed and fortunate to be working in Chelsea. When I came to Massachusetts around 9 years ago, my wife's family members said, you need to be working in Chelsea. I didn't know what Chelsea was. I hadn't been here. I thought Massachusetts was just like Braintree. And what a mistake, right? And I felt a purpose here. I still continue to feel a purpose here from hanging out at Market Basket, saying hi to everybody. It just really touched me. So,
Thank you, Dan. Good morning. My name is Rochelle Brummel again, as if you don't know me. I am truly moved by Judith Garcia's story. The unfortunate side is that we still have families, entire families, sleeping on floors in Chelsea. So that was a while ago. We have a lot of work to do if these things are still happening. We want to talk about trying to break a cycle. It's been a long time. I'm really thrilled to have the partners that I work with. I am the executive director of CAPIC. I've already said that, but CAPIC provides a whole litany of services that address the needs of the community. We're talking about a path forward today in Chelsea. CAPIC also serves Revere and Winthrop, and everybody is entitled to all the services that we offer at CAPIC. So we have a whole array of services that we offer the entire community to make sure that we are meeting the needs. We are in the height of fuel assistance. We are in the height of our energy program. We are serving over 2,500 people in that program. We have also gotten additional, with the increases that have come with utilities and gas and stuff like that, we have an additional 350 people signed up, you know, looking for help with fuel assistance. You know, so we're definitely at crisis level, but like I said, I took this position in the height of the pandemic, so I'm used to working at a crisis level, and we've got a lot to do. No other way forward. There's no other way forward than to rely on partnerships from the community. There is no one organization that can solve all the issues that we're facing within the pandemic. We are still stabilizing people, okay? We talk about recovery. We are still stabilizing families, you know, and get them stable, and then we're going to talk about the recovery period, the recovery phase of what's that going to look like for Chelsea. All input is definitely welcome on the recovery of Chelsea, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about let's get our community to a different place. I'm not going to take up too much time because I can go on forever. And I just want to thank you for all coming out today. And I want to thank MASSCAP again for joining us. I'm so excited that MASSCAP is in Chelsea. That's awesome. And I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Thank you so much.
Hi everybody, I am also so honored to be a part of this incredible panel. I'm a social worker and I'm the director of the Healthy Chelsea Coalition and the Review of Papers Coalition. We're a part of Mass General Hospital Center for Community Health Improvement, which is basically like a public health arm of MGH. So every 3 years, community health needs assessments are done in our communities, and based on what the community residents and people who work here feel are the most pressing public health and community health issues, that's how we form our work plan. So we started 12 years ago, around the issue of childhood obesity, which as we know is very closely linked to poverty. And we've expanded to address youth substance use, prevention, mental health, and we've formed Early Childhood Network. So we really are focused on how do we work together as a community, which in Chelsea is a very special thing, because community partners all throughout Chelsea are just incredible and really do work together to make the lives of our residents better. So I'm just really, as I said, honored to be a part of such incredible partnerships, collaboration, and collective impact that all of these partners really work to address. So I thank you for being here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jen. So echoing the sentiment that Michelle shared, as well as Judith, you know, breaking the cycle, the racist cycle of poverty, is a serious responsibility. The MASSCAP report recently published covers a variety of policy and programmatic recommendations that we can apply going forward. So for each of the panelists, starting with the Senator, what resonated with you out of that report? How do you see yourself applying that in your daily work?
Yeah, so there's many challenges in our communities, and Chelsea being one of them. And you saw from the report numbers online. You saw we talked about it a lot, but when you actually see them on paper, and you see the full breadth of what we're up against in our communities, particularly in Chelsea. So at the state level, we've been working on, as was said, not just talking about like action, but words into action. And I'm here because I'm the state senator for Chelsea, but also our office at the State House is seen as the anti-poverty office in the state senate, because we work on a lot of issues to address anti-poverty in our communities in a holistic way. You can't just solve this big issue with one policy change. It has to be many different fronts coming together. So, our office, Martina, Commander from my office, is here as well. She writes legislation for us, so she is like in deep with anti-poverty stuff, because we are looked at for our role in the Senate, because we have over in Chelsea in particular. There are two high-income communities in our state. And we're hit disproportionately, as we all said. We've said it many, many times. And Chelsea, at one point, was the highest rate of infection per capita in the nation. You know, people look at New York City, but it was actually Chelsea was the highest at one point. And we have filed legislation to address it, not just now, but we've been doing it our entire time in the Senate, within 13 years. And we've been successful on several fronts, increasing cash assistance to our long-term residents. Up until almost 3 years ago, when we started working on this, that number had not increased in over 30 years, which is pretty remarkable when you think about that. And we have been able to make incremental progress because any change, as we said, takes time to study, takes time to house, takes time to government in general. But we have had several wins at this front where we've increased it 10% in the last 2 years. We're filing a bill this year to increase it by 25%. Now that gets more cash into the hands of folks to buy, you know, types of food instead of getting gas food for the kids, maybe get produce for the children, help pay the rent, help pay the medical expenses, and not have to make as many tough choices as they're making today. Also, the SNAP gap. There are 700,000 people in this state that we believe qualify for SNAP. They're not even going to that benefit. It's a federal program, no cost to the state, but individuals don't have time to find out if they qualify for it. Or they're afraid of government offices. Let's be real, right? They don't want to put their name on paper, sign any documents, for fear of that going somewhere that they don't want it to go. So they're leaving this public benefit on the table, which again is 700,000 plus, just in this state alone. So we have addressed that by when you sign up for MassCap, there's a checkbox on that application. We automatically now apply first. So you don't have to do the double take and try to figure out the navigate the snake bureaucracy. And a lot of times you don't even know there's a program out there because you're too busy looking 2 or 3 jobs at a time. So now we're making it easier where you now automatically are getting enrolled in that program if you qualify for SNAP. And you know, the simple thing is when you work a job, you expect to get paid. And immigrants and black and brown individuals are disproportionately affected by wage theft across the state. And I'm happy to see this community, it's one of the only communities in the entire state that passed an ordinance in this city where wage theft is now, sounds odd, you can create a law to pay people their own wage. But we have filed legislation to address this. And there's about $1 billion in lost wages every year that employers are stealing from employees. And we have passed that in the state Senate several times. We're hoping that the members of the side will help. We're going to get us across the finish line in the House. And lastly, you know, I'm trying to cover policy all day because we've been working on this a lot. But universal school meals. The federal government during the pandemic said all children are going to be having free meals across the board, across the nation. Now, one person in the Senate decided the pandemic was over and decided that he was going to unilaterally stop this program. He's going to college. I'll mention his name. It's McConnell. So, because of his thought process, his backward thinking, the universal school meals program was cut across the board for the entire nation. Now, it was put on the state's back to continue the program that they could afford to do so. And again, budgets are made of tough choices and a value system of what we think is important to us. We made a choice that school meals was very important to us. So the legislature has devoted $110 million to extend it for a year. That means the battle is coming up again. It's coming this year. So we have filed legislation to make this a permanent law in the state, to make sure that all children, regardless of income status, anything, they are going to get free school lunches and breakfast across the board. So, you know, we've been working on this. We have partners in the House. We're going to establish an anti-poverty caucus. Breaking news. That's going to be established by myself and Representative Decker as the chairs, and some local partners involved in that, but this is something that, as you can see, EIT, expanding the earned income tax credit, we filed bill on that as well. State child tax credit, we filed bill on that as well. So all the things that Nancy was mentioning as things that we can help turn our communities around, we are working on that. And lastly, President Biden, when I went to the White House conference on hunger and nutrition, he was talking about things that our state is trying to have as a nationwide model. And so we're ahead of the curve by far, but it's a big but there. No matter if we do all these things tomorrow, we still need 9 years. So the battle doesn't end here. The battle is something that we keep going forward. So I'm just fortunate we have a lot of local folks in this room that can probably look back with us and making sure that we hold down the state, provide for our residents, and even partnering our office and our team who are working on these issues and teams.
Great, thank you, Senator. So Jen, you're in an interesting position, primarily serving small businesses, many of which are immigrant owned, Latinx owned in this community. So what resonated with you about this report, and how can you sort of use that to influence the work that you do with our small business community?
So it's a little bit interesting, my perspective on how I can help. What I find that it's, where we're located, we're centrally located on 308 Broadway. We're not just a resource for the small businesses, we're a resource for the entire community. So in all reality, what I cherish the most, as Michelle mentioned, I'm kind of like a post-pandemic baby, I guess, because I started at the Chamber in March of this year. And I've seen the transition, and I've lived it with all the organizations that got us through the pandemic. So what I say at the Chamber is, our strength is the collaboration that we have with the City of Chelsea, with Alex's team, with Tom's team, with the City of Chelsea, with the different organizations like the Collaborative. We're part of the Good Jobs Coalition with a bunch of other organizations that are here in this room. And I think that the key is really making sure that the small businesses understand that there's programs out there for them. We often open houses at the Chamber where they can come in and we actually assist with them filling out applications to make it easier for them, to make sure that it's understood, the process is understood. And that's the same as well for the community members, for residents of the city. They come in looking for education. We teach English classes, we teach Spanish classes. We try to offer serve-safe classes for restaurant owners to make sure that their employees can continue to work and that their restaurants are meeting the city requirements and the state requirements. So at the Chamber, as I mentioned, we have individuals coming in and asking about housing, asking about assistance in different facets. So what we pride ourselves in is that we have information regarding most of the resources in the city. We can send them to the Senior Center, we send them to Chelsea Housing. We work with the city as well, making sure that the small businesses are aware of the different programs that are available to them. That's going to help sustain their staff, sustain their business, and keep them open, which at the end of the day helps the economy in Chelsea. So we're in a unique position, as I mentioned. When you think of the Chelsea Chamber of Commerce, you think small business, but we're really more than that, and I'm really proud to be able to say that. So thank you again for having me.
Fantastic, thank you, Jen. And raising the issue of centralizing resources is really key. It's something that Dan has really done quite well in his career. So, Dan, from your perspective, where do you see the police department fitting into this? Whether it's making resources more accessible or breaking down some of the barriers that you see between the police department and the resident community?
So, I would have to, thanks Alex, I'd have to preface that by first explaining what my position is. I work for the police department, but I'm a civilian employee. And there aren't a whole lot of civilian employees within police departments that have, I don't want to say like a high level of I have a lot of responsibility. I'm not just a coffee guy who coordinates those events. I manage or coordinate the Chelsea Hub, and that's one of the reasons why the police department of Chelsea is viewed as a I almost click social service agency as a whole, because that's really what we do. Obviously, protect and serve, but as part of the coordinator of Chelsea Hub, we bring all the service providers into the community room police issue pre-pandemic, now it's mostly on Zoom. But every Tuesday, we hear of situations with individuals and families that are highly at risk. And it gives you a first-hand perspective of what that family is going through. Because then you develop special teams that meet at the end of the meeting and you delve deeper into what is really going on in that family or that individual life. So rather than saying, hey, we have a lot of people that need this kind of help and that kind of help, we're going to develop programs and we're going to fund that program and hopefully help them. With the help, you're actually in the person's home. So I think we're getting a first-hand look at what people are really, really struggling with. Our new chief recently made a comment saying that, you know, I've really learned a lot just in the past month or so that he's been coming to our meetings. When he comes to our meetings, he actually goes on the door knocks, which is really saying something. That's a huge position of leadership in my opinion. So the police department gets viewed in a positive way for a lot of reasons, a lot of things that, you know, our former chief, Brian Guys, did creating this position for one. And also saying we're going to do the hub. We're the first ones in the United States to do it. It's a Canadian model. We have a lot of problems in the city. We really need to coordinate our services. And it's been wonderful. We've been doing it for 7 years now. So I think the role that police departments have, and we actually get called from police departments all the time. You know, what are you doing there? I hear about all the great things that are happening in the city, and I keep hearing that the police department is involved. You know, how do you do that? So it's been a lot of really good conversations. The hub actually served as a model for some of the other things that we do, like the Eviction Task Force. Our pandemic response team was loosely modeled after the hub. I still remember Mimi calling me into our office to discuss what we could do. That was a memorable moment. Our downtown task force, some of you might hopefully think that our downtown looks better now than it did maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we bring the chamber, property owners, property managers, social service agencies, inspectional services, Department of Public Works, and it's all pretty much led by Tom. You know, we find the things for Tom to understand, and he says, I need DPW to do this, I need inspection services to do this, and together we can solve problems. The next week when we meet, we get updates. And I think that's what sets us apart from a lot of other communities. So we have 3 weekly meetings where issues are presented, teams are developed on who's going to respond to this issue, and then we update each other. That doesn't give you an opportunity to say, yeah, I can do that. And then 3 months later, oh, I never got around to it. Because you know that the next week you have to say what you did. So I think that's an important thing that a police department does. We get viewed as an objective force, right? A lot of times nonprofits sometimes compete with each other and things like that. That's just natural. That happens in every community in every state in the country. The police department gets this unique role. It plays this unique role, and then it is an objective force. And people come gather and solve problems.
Thank you, Dan. So, Dan touched on the subject of local collaboration. That's really in line with what Representative-elect Garcia mentioned earlier, where, as government, as nonprofit leaders, as residents, we have to challenge kind of the status quo of how our agencies deliver services, and what types of policies and services that we should be delivering. And Rochelle's really been on the front line of this, thinking through how we can innovatively connect residents with services, particularly vulnerable residents that don't have access to rental assistance, food assistance, or job training. So, Rochelle, I think from your perspective, what are your key takeaways from this report, and what will you be focusing on over the next year?
We're always focused on making sure that all the needs are met in the community. So that, with that said, if we're not providing a service at CAPIC, I'm going to partner with somebody else that's going to provide services so that we can take care of these issues that we're dealing in a linear manner. We are all, CAPIC is 100% on board. We've been on board since the start of the pandemic. We've been on board throughout the whole entire process, and we are carrying our weight. And this when we have different people coming to the table, it is so important that each individual partner takes responsibility and accountability for your pie, your piece of the whole pie. We have a solution, a collaborative solution. It is entirely up to each individual, their contributions that they make to the solution. So CAPIC partners itself with folks that can add additional resources. Because let's face it, the families that we deal with have many different challenges. They may be a housing challenge, it may be a housing crisis, it might be food insecurity, it might be child care that they need. So we want to take a holistic approach to each family that we deal with, to each family that we're working with, to make sure that we have everybody included that's going to help with the solution. And that's real important for me, and that's real important for the community work that CAPIC has done. We have a phenomenal staff. My staff is there's nothing that they won't do. They've been in situations since they made a quick transition, it was on a dime, to make sure that these services were continued to be distributed by CAPIC. It was on a dime that we transformed and we got into remote work and different ways of delivering services, but it's just about collaborations, it's about teamwork, working together. And when people are moving in unison, things get done. It's like you get everybody on board and you can have the solutions that you need because you got all the resources at the table for individual families. And as far as the inequities that we have faced, that's bothersome. That's extremely bothersome. You know what I'm saying? So we have to deal with those inequities on different levels. We have to deal with those inequities where they have started right at the top. So we need to start making policy changes at the top and trickle down into the different agencies and service agencies that we are all very familiar with. And we need to start making internal changes on those levels to really deal with this. I mean, we can have conversations about how we interact. We can have conversations about acceptance. But the real issues were the policies that were made that need to be addressed. So we have to get people on board so that we can deal with those issues as well, because the inequities that we faced throughout the pandemic, the inequities that we faced before the pandemic. You know what I'm saying? The housing crisis, 5 families, 1 apartment. How much were we going to control the spread of COVID-19? We had nothing. We had no choice. And our choices are limited. We have a serious housing crisis. Serious housing crisis. We have a food insecurity crisis. We've got a crisis with utilities. We are in crisis level constantly. You know what I'm saying? So it takes a lot of people to come to the table to share your resources so that we solve these problems. And then the City of Chelsea has been extremely supportive of us as a community with their services, with their advocacy. So we know what's important here. And there's a lot of programs right here in Chelsea that are models for the rest of the country. What does that tell you? We're getting things done here. I'm pretty optimistic. And the task is great. The task is a great feat. But we have what we need here to move ourselves forward. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this community and the agencies that are providing service in this community. Because I know I can start a carers organization or you want. I mean, we have a family, we need clothes, we need furniture, we need rental assistance, 5 stops. Oh, we got what we knew. We got what we need. This family's on its way. It has everything it it being settled. It's a matter of collaborations, pulling resources together, and giving every resource and giving every family that we serve the same opportunities. And I am so thrilled to be a part of this giving community.
Thank you, Rochelle. So that social infrastructure that Rochelle mentioned really is unique to Chelsea. And a lot of Jen's work is centered around how do we create a mental health infrastructure that would be no different than having running water or access to health care. And so Jen, we will talk a little bit about the ongoing efforts that you're leading at Health in Chelsea and how that pertains to broadening quality and access to mental health care for residents of Chelsea.
Absolutely, yeah. I think something that stuck out in that report are the long-standing consequences of policies made 50 years ago that are still affecting us today and will tomorrow. Something we talk a lot about at coalition work is how the social determinants of health, that your zip code is much more predictive of your overall health and your family's health than your genetic code. And I think looking at the list up there, as you can see, there's so many, as Rochelle said, we have many crises. Another saying that we stole from somebody is that rent eats first. So housing takes priority, and that takes away food. And we're so lucky to have Ron Fishman gathering the emergency food providers each week to collaborate and talk and problem solve and work together so that services are not duplicated. And when the pandemic hit, again, these were issues that were really plaguing Chelsea before the pandemic, which just completely exacerbated during the difficult work, which really affected people's mental health. When you are isolated and sick and worried about your family and losing your job and worried about not being able to pay for housing and the great food insecurity that we still are dealing with, you know, people's stress levels, anxiety, and the isolation that people were feeling, which is incredible. So we also gather a couple of times a month the mental health providers of our community to figure out how we can all, again, work together to not duplicate. What are the gaps in services? What would be helpful strategies? Because as we know, MGH Health Center, for example, the wait list for individual counseling is 500 people long. And we know that that's similar stories in many of our mental health agencies. So how can we work together to provide less clinical or non-clinical strategies to reduce people's anxiety and stress levels and help them be able to meet their basic needs? So how, we're looking to replicate services of like a family resource center where services are one-stop shop, and we know that people can, instead of stopping at 5 places, wouldn't it be nice to be able to just stop at 1 and be able to meet all those basic needs and have a support group for parents or a parenting skills group or a teen support group. Space is very difficult in Chelsea, so we're working around that and how can we decentralize those services a little bit, and again stressing non-clinical supportive services in addition to navigating these services to people. The systems that our families have to deal with are very complicated and very difficult to navigate. So can we hire, which we hope to do, additional, which is already a model in Chelsea, that we have these wonderful street navigators. We have amazing examples of case management all over, but it seems, there's never enough of that. And how can we help families navigate these services by hiring some intensive caseworkers? We need an army of them, of course, but being able to meet people's basic needs is so important to reduce their mental health concerns.
Excellent, thank you, Jen. So I want to shift gears for a second from the local work that's ongoing up to state policy. And luckily we have Senator Dean Hicko with us, as well as Representative-elect Garcia. But I'll open this up to all the panelists. What is one or two of your major state policy priorities in 2023, and what do we have to do to get that
I have too many. Do you guys want to? Is that?
Yeah, I think this is.
No, it was for any of the panelists.
Oh.
I want to say what we're still.
Go for it. Well, there is one thing. It's not really a statewide policy, but there are 19 hubs in Massachusetts, and we've trained CAPIC and myself trained all the situation tables from all the way out in North Adams to Medford to Braintree, Quincy to now there's one at MASSCAP starting this summer, and they're really well because which is a good example. So you have all sorts of services in one location, trying to provide help for individuals, but they're not doing it together. So what the hub situation table does is it brings all of them together once a week. They all talk about the same individual and what all the issues, risk factors that person has, and they do it in a coordinated manner. They've really been effective just in a short time that they've been together. There are about a dozen outside of the state that we've also trained. So I think in terms of policy, it's not really a policy. I think it's just a movement. You're saying the models here that we do that can be replicated. And I think the reason why that's possible is because we have, well, first off, we're 2 square miles, right? And we are sort of like an incubator of ideas. So somebody says, hey, I've got an idea. It can work. There was a resident that called me up one time. She said, Dan, I really want to put flowers on Broadway. I remember thinking, well, you should. And she said, well, no, whose permission do I have to get? I go, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we put up some flowers and see if we get it going. And so, and that led to this big movement. So when you see all those big flower boxes on Broadway, that's because one resident had an idea and it wasn't forwarded, right? And that's, I think, where it was needed really everywhere. There are communities all over the country have great people. They have great programs. They have great organizations, but they don't get together and work. They don't dig deep. They don't peel back the onion. People that we're dealing with, the people that we're talking about, they all have life puzzles, and those puzzles often fall to the ground. And when that happens, the pieces go all over the place. And they're expected to put them all back together by themselves. And whereas what we do is we try to put them all together. It's just like when there's a huge accident before the first responders get there. Everybody jumps, rolls up their sleeves, and do whatever they can to help. If it's a fire or whatever. And then when the situation is settled and calm is restored, they go back to their houses. They go back to their, for an hour they were talking to each other and they were working and this is terrible what happened, but this is great what we're doing. And then when the incident's over, they go back and they don't do it again. What we do in Chelsea is every week 3 situation tables do that every week. So you develop relationships, you call each other up and say, Michelle, this is a tough situation, but I need help with this. I'll get a text from Alex at night, Michelle at night. Jen has been wonderful. She's just great. We'll call each other up all the time. There's people here to care about everybody else. It's because of that, those forums that we've created.
Great. Thank you, Dan.
I can just add to that, Alex. I think that on policies that have to be changed on a statewide level would definitely that would benefit folks here in Chelsea is to talk about the changes that need to be made in immigration status and the resources, because we want to serve everybody. You know what I'm saying? There are policies, there are restrictions in our funding sources that we can't serve everybody. And we know that the need of immigrants is high here in Chelsea. So we need to look at the policies pertaining to immigration status and the resources and the funding that we can use towards them, and the resources and funding that we can use to provide services to them. I mean, we can use other funding, but policies in general for folks that immigrate to this country should be changed, should be looked at a state level. Absolutely.
We wholeheartedly agree. Jen?
I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be a part, work in a community where these progressive policies have happened, especially since the pandemic. The Chelsea Keeps program, which you talked about earlier, and having this universal income-based program, I think, is effective. And we've seen, as the reports come out from the Harvard study, that people really benefited immensely from those programs and helped a bit to keep people out of poverty. So I'm so excited that that program's coming back, and I'm so excited to be a part of a community where there's progressive policies. I just wish at a state level and a national level, those kinds of things might be able to get a foothold.
Thank you, Jen. Senator, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, the law supports some women attacking this issue. So I'll just lump things into different buckets because instead of listing out all the things that we're working on, because it's what I've already mentioned, I don't want to repeat it, but getting cash assistance in those hands and making them keep more of their own money they've earned is the way we're going to help our residents the most. So the income tax credit, expanding child tax credit, cash assistance programs, SNAP, yeah, all those lump into one bucket in terms of making sure that people are not paying disproportionately, to our more higher earners in the state. As you can see here, our tax system is actually the people that are paying the most are the ones that are the least important. And that's what's happening across the board in our state. So all these tax fixes is a priority of mine this session. The Senate President has said publicly that we are going to overhaul taxes in this session to make it more equitable for our residents in our local communities. So that's something that, number one, we're going to get that done. Education, universal pre-K, child care. You cannot go to work unless you have a place that you feel safe leaving your child, and it's affordable. Instead of paying your entire paycheck to child care, which again is upside down of how we work as a system. We've been filing sessions on this for the last 13 years. The state Senate passed a broad early education and care bill last session. It didn't make it over to the other side. It wasn't passed, but we're looking forward to working with our members in the House to get that done this session. I have advocated, and I think this to me, I come at it from when I'm a parent, and my only two boys went to public schools, and started in preschool at 3 years old. Free preschool at 3 years old, unheard of in most communities. Chelsea is also another curve this way, with the Silver Balloon Center. But across the board in our state, it has become unaffordable for low-income earners to put their kids in child care. And we need to make sure that Chapter 70 funding, as a state, doesn't start at kindergarten. That's 3 years old. To get reimbursed for preschool like you would any other grade in our school system. That is only we're going to fix the system across the board. Now we have providers in our communities. So it's a mixed model system that many communities have. Where you have public schools, have preschool. You have providers in the community that have preschool. And early education and care programs. And disproportionately, most of those providers are minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, that can't afford to pay their own help. And if they do, they can't give them raises over time. The cost of living increases, inflation increases, they can't keep up with that. So many times, those employees leave the system and go work somewhere else, which creates inconsistency across the board. So you're constantly having this new influx of employees, which is great, we're getting jobs, but now the experience is moving on every 1 or 2 years. We need to create jobs that are careers, not just entry-level jobs in this area, that are just going to be there for 2 or 3 years and moving on to the next job in their career. So it is a constant battle to Department of Elementary Education, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and I have not always seen eye to eye. Surprise, surprise. With their funding model and how they fund our public schools as well. Chelsea and Everett in particular, when we changed the model, we just changed the model a few years back, they disproportionately hit our gateway communities in a negative way. With the economically disadvantaged students, we're not counted actively in our school system. We fought, our office fought for years to the point where we became public enemy number 1 on DESE's list, because we called them out on it. And said these inequities exist. You cannot tell me they don't, they don't. They were not held harmless. The numbers, again, don't lie.
That's right.
So we have been able to work with our colleagues in the passed Student Opportunity Act, which is the biggest education policy change legislation we've had in a generation, which fixes some of the inequities that we've had in our local communities. And Chelsea and Everett were big winners in that, with the funding that is going to be coming over time and sustainable increases where our communities can count on real numbers, not just working on the edges, but real chunks of money coming to our schools. And lastly, you know, we have, as was mentioned, housing is a very, very big issue in many communities, including Chelsea. Right to counsel, which is a bill we've been filing in the last couple of sessions. We are looking forward to getting done this session. It's a common trend here. We pass a lot of bills in the Senate. We pass a lot of things that happen that are going to help a lot of people.
That's right.
Many sign into law, and some are just ready to be signed into law. We have a new governor coming in. The right to counsel is something that she's been working on, and something that we want to have a partner with at the gubernatorial level, and where we see some real movement in this area now. We all know that a lot of our friends, and we get calls in our office where people just knock on the door and say you're being evicted tomorrow, and they don't know they have any recourse. And many are afraid to take on the system, many are afraid to go to court, many are afraid to just speak up. And they walk out the door, which creates a more unstable housing issue in our communities. And they're moving in with their friends and family, as Michelle said, 5 families living in a two-bedroom apartment. Not sustainable. Right to counsel will allow them representation. 80% of the landlords go into court representation. 6% of the tenants. That disparity doesn't work. And we all know the outcome in that. So there are real policy changes that we're working on at the state level that will help a lot of folks in our communities. But one is not going to work. Again, this is the approach that we're taking, the holistic approach. We have many different legislations to combat the problem. Now I'm here today to ask for your help too. Because all things that I've been talking about are not easy to pass. Because there are a lot of great bills that are filed every year. There's 6,000 bills filed every year, approximately. 5,000 are pretty good. 7,000 I wouldn't touch, but 5,000 are pretty good. But only a couple hundred pass. So that just shows you how methodical and how slow government works.
Yeah.
But the squeaky wheel does get the oil. In the Senate in particular, I know, because I can tell you, if they hear from outside forces, they will respond. So a lot of these issues that I'm talking about, we were working with the inside game, but we need the outside forces as well. A lot of these bills that passed, that I'm talking about, didn't pass because we put them up to the floor, because you folks said it's time to pass bills. And you came to the State House, and you wrote letters, and talked to the chairs, and said enough is enough. Student Opportunity Act, no, it would never have passed. Never would have passed if the people in the community didn't rise up and say enough is enough. These inequities are not going to go any longer. So, you know, these bills are really important for a lot of people. You know, again, we talk about action, not just words. We really need to put all these bills into law. And you know, if we can do this, then we'll slowly, and in some cases, in a more faster version, help a lot of families in our town to wait. Because a lot of these bills take 6, 7 years, sometimes 8 years to pass. And now you've got a whole group of people who are struggling with that time period. So it's great to talk about it. It's great to talk about how we're going to fix the problem. But again, actions don't. Actions are the way to get things done. And then I can say lastly, the advocacy piece is important. important. And, you know, Martina's she can recite this part of my presentation verbatim, because I say this all the time. When you talk to my colleagues in the State House, the cameras are on, they get in trouble when the cameras are on, but a lot of these issues, people are going to say this is important. Because why wouldn't they, right? They make sense. Helping people get back on their feet. But there are so many competing demands in legislators and senators. So when people say we're going to support something, you're going to feel good, walk out the door, Tuesday and talk to them. You have to ask them what they're going to do to move this issue. You're going to write a letter to the chair, talk to the Senate President, talk to the Speaker, make it a budget priority on the list, and not make it number 20 on your list. There's 20 priorities and there's no priorities. The top 3 priority, you're going to put precious families in poverty. You're going to join the battle with us and actually put that as a priority. Ask them what they're going to do. And then follow up with them. And make sure they did it. Because support means nothing. We support a lot of great things that don't get done. So my ask to all of you is you have me already, so but hold me accountable too. But if you have friends in other communities that can call legislators and can talk to people and write in simple, you know, we get 3 or 4 emails on an issue, we pay attention. That's not the norm. Like sometimes you get 1 or 2 on things. 3 or 4, like, okay, what is this? You don't need 200 people email the legislator. 4 or 5 is great. So that's what we need, you know, we're here to talk about how we're going to get outside of poverty. That's how we get out. We pass meaningful legislation that's going to change that in the state. Yeah, what will help the need.
Great, thank you, Senator, for explaining the legislative path forward as well as some of the concrete next steps we can take to support this agenda. So with this, we're right at about time right now. Rochelle, I'll turn this over to you to begin closing this out.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for coming out today, and I want to share a story. I want someone to share a story about the work that we do at CAPIC. And I'm going to call Stacy up to share a story.
Local organizations are helping our community grow and are helping folks who are really in need get their needs met almost immediately. To my knowledge, there weren't always resources like this available in our community, such as shelter, assistance with housing, substance abuse counseling, things of mental health, locally for the adult male, ranging from age to 20 to 65 years old. If there was, it was in the form of AA or in some city far, far away, where it would ultimately take these folks away from what they've known their whole life. That's at least from my perspective. Since I've become aware of these resources and organizations in our community, like Rochelle Cromwell at CAPIC, Dan Cortez at the Hub, Teresa DiPietro at ACO, Jana at Housing Families, and even Mystic Valley Elder Services, and of course Alexander the Great, who works wonderfully all of that. I personally have been able to successfully enroll 2 adult males into the Chelsea Commons, which is formerly the Chelsea YMCA. These men were sleeping in cars, trucks, and many uninhabitable places. They had no place to call home for years. They felt hopeless and they had no resources to exhaust, which made life extremely difficult for them. Sometimes even going to, one of the men told me that going to jail was an option because at least he had 3 pots in a pot. That was the term that was used. Once they were connected with Jan, Rochelle, Teresa, and the other names I mentioned earlier, they were greeted with open arms. These men were giving hope, and they were given a sense of normalcy, provided with a hotel room for a short stay, and treated very well. They were able to take a hot shower, lay in a bed, watch TV, or make a meal. These are just some of the small things some of us take for granted. After a short stay at the hotel, they were provided an SRO, which is, you don't know, it's a single room occupancy, which they sign a lease and rent will be income based. These men have close access to the MBTA, doctors, libraries, city hall, and other resources that are in the downtown area. This is very empowering for these men, especially where they were at such a low point in life. They have been given their faith back in humanity thanks to these organizations that are here in Chelsea, Massachusetts now. The organizations also work very well together, which everybody has said earlier, and I can definitely attest to that. It was like if one person didn't have the resource, they referred, and it was such, I mean, I can text these folks that I named at 10 o'clock at night and they're responding. Because the urgency is there. And then this is something that is very needed in our community. Our community has faced many hardships prior to the pandemic, post-pandemic, and we have a lot to overcome. I look forward to continuing to help my community grow and get real issues addressed, and as one body, we can do more. So working together and networking with everybody else has been really an honor, and I'm somebody who is like boots on the ground, if you want to say. So people in our community feel comfortable expressing these things to me, and hoping that more folks like myself will get out there and get these people more self-sufficient and off the street. Thank you.
We have one more.
Good afternoon. My name is Monica. I'm a little bit nervous. Long life Chelsea resident. Been here for 45 years. This is my personal story, and how grateful, thankful, and blessed I am to the program of CAPIC. I have worked for a restaurant for over about 30 years. Recently had health issues, breast cancer, that I had to step down from a position that I was for 17 years in Revere. So something new that I had to do. I've always been independent and always worked for my, since I was 14, 15 years old, and had to recently turn to a program. And again, it's blessed, thankful, and grateful that they were here that helped me through a difficult position in my life where I had to need help for rental and utility. So again, I'm very thankful that the program is there, and I am one of those recipients that have been blessed with it.
Amen. Thank you so much. I don't know if I need that. I don't think I need that. It's not mine. So, this was wonderful. I wish we had a lot more time for feedback and input from you all. That's why I invited you here. But mostly to talk about the issues that we're dealing with, to talk about the history of the issues that we're dealing with in Chelsea and how we came to this place. But I thank you so much, Norma, for sharing your story. It's not just families that we serve at CAPIC, it's individuals that we serve at CAPIC. We want to make sure that everybody's needs are being met, and I will say that it's been an honor to have MASSCAP come to Chelsea and see how we do things here. I'm sure they're pretty impressed with the collaboration that we have here and the work that we do here. And we continue this work with your help. We continue this work with the resources that you bring to the table. So I've been explaining about this collaboration and how it works, and you had testament to that on how we work together to solve issues. So I thank you so much for coming out.